Okay, today we're going to be talking about applying learning theories in the K-5 classroom. We're going to start by talking about a little bit about behaviorism, particularly reinforcement and variable reinforcement schedules. So on each slide, we're going to talk about what is the learning theory and how can you use it in a K-5 classroom. The first one we're discussing is reinforcement. Reinforcement works closely with operant conditioning. A reinforcer is a stimulus or event that increases the frequency of the response that it follows. A response immediately followed by a reinforcer is strengthened and more likely to recur. There are many different types of reinforcers. They can be positive or negative. Positive reinforcement occurs when a stimulus is presented after a desired behavior. These could be material reinforcers like toys or candy out of a treasure box. They could be social reinforcers like praise, activity reinforcers like computer free time or maybe extra recess time, token reinforcers like a token given to buy other items in the future, or even intrinsic reinforcers where a student follows behaviors simply because of the internal reinforcement of good feelings. You could also use negative reinforcement, which is when a stimulus is removed in response to a behavior. Negative reinforcement doesn't necessarily have to be unpleasant just because the word is negative. It simply means something is being taken away. For example, removal of anxiety would be considered negative reinforcement. So there are many ways to provide reinforcement in the classroom. The most important thing to remember is that the reinforcement should be provided immediately after a desired behavior or quickly after. One way our school uses reinforcement is through the PBIS system. You can provide Hoot Loots or tokens to students that are following the PBIS expectations. These Hoot Loots don't have to cost you anything, they're just a sheet of paper. And then the students can take those tokens and go buy things at the school store. Another way to use positive reinforcement in the classroom is to provide students with small material items in response to desired behaviors. So maybe you have pencils or fun erasers for your students to use. One way you use negative reinforcement in the classroom would be maybe to remove homework for the night. It's not something unpleasant, it's just a removal of stimulus. You should be using these reinforcements on a variable reinforcement schedule. According to Ormrod, behaviorists recommend reinforcing a response continuously until the desired form at the desired frequency is reached. After that, it should be maintained through a schedule. A variable ratio schedule is very useful in the K-5 classroom. Teachers using a variable ratio schedule will provide a reinforcement after a particular but continuously changing number of responses. For example, a teacher may provide a token after 3 responses, then 4, then 6, and maybe just stay around an average of 5. These reinforcers are typically unpredictable and work in the classroom because the student may never know when a response will provide that reinforcement that they want. A variable interval schedule is a little bit different than a variable ratio schedule. In a variable interval schedule, the amount of time passed between reinforcers will change. So, with the variable ratio schedule, you can provide a student or random students a token after producing desired behaviors in the classroom, like said. You might provide a token after correctly answering 3 math facts, then 5 facts, then 7 facts, then you could go back to 5 and maybe stay around an average of 5 math facts. You can use an interval schedule in the classroom for a student that may struggle staying on task independently. One way I do this is by students receiving a token after staying on task for maybe 2 minutes, then 5, and increasing the amount of time until the desired time is reached. You can shorten or extend the interval between times based on the student's behaviors. Next, we're going to discuss cognitivism, particularly sociocultural theory and verbalization. So, with sociocultural theory, Vygotsky researched it. He believed that children learn through interactions with adults around them and the culture in which they grew up. Adults help children understand the world around them and interpret these new ideas. They can introduce new learning tools to students. Children learn and remember more when they talk about their experiences, according to Vygotsky's theories. So, in the classroom, students that move from different cultures will have a different understanding of the world. You can allow your students to share those understandings. You can acknowledge these understandings in the classroom and embrace them. This is incredibly important at our school since we're near a military base. We're constantly receiving students and having them join our classroom that are from different cultures. Remember that different cultures may pass along different cognitive tools. Teachers have the ability to pass along new cognitive tools to their students as well. You can allow them to talk about what they're doing in their classroom. You can guide your students on their learning paths. When students discuss the content, they remember it more easily in the future. Have students discuss their learning with their peers and encourage the class discussion. This is especially important in science, is what I've found during labs and explorations of activities. Next, let's discuss verbalization. Verbalization is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. They're writing or talking about an experience. For older students, verbalization can occur when students talk to themselves in order to understand something better. This is known as self-explanation. It's similar to what we often hear as self-talk. Verbalization helps facilitate long-term memory storage. In the classroom for reading, students could complete study questions after reading a story to gain a deeper understanding of the story. This allows students to analyze the text and make connections to what they are learning. This is helpful in my classroom because a lot of my students will read a passage and not remember what was in the passage. In math, students could discuss their problems with their class or a peer. They may discuss how they solved a problem and how the problem connected to what they were actually learning in the classroom. Next, we're going to discuss motivation. We're going to focus on personal versus situational interest and attribution theory. Interest is a form of intrinsic motivation. There are two types of interest that we will be covering: personal and situational interest. Personal interests are within a learner and tend to have different preferences based on the learner. For example, my personal interests are coffee and dogs. Therefore, I spend too much of my money taking my dog to the local coffee shop to get pup cups. The other interest is situational interest. Situational interest is an interest someone has based on the environment around them. These interests may only be temporary based on the environment. For example, one central situational interest my husband has in the summer is the best bait to use when fishing. The interest is only during the prime fishing season. People who are more interested in a topic are more likely to be engaged and participate in meaningful learning. So how can we use that in the classroom? As a teacher, you must find ways to interest your students in the content they are studying. One way to appeal to students' personal interests is to understand what your students like. For example, many of my students were very interested in Minecraft this past year. This made teaching rocks and minerals a little bit easier for me. I was able to relate the rocks and minerals we were studying to the video game my students enjoyed. You can also use situational interest in the classroom by having students become more engaged when they're trying something new. So you can do this by having maybe a room transformation. Maybe you teach fractions in math by transforming your classroom into a pizza restaurant and allowing students to create fractions based on pizza. Next up is attribution theory. So attribution theory refers to people's explanations for success and failure and what causes each. There are three key parts on which people's attributions change, which are locus, stability, and controllability. Locus can be internal or external. Internal locus are factors within ourselves, such as the feeling you get after receiving a bad grade. You may blame yourself for not studying enough or rushing through your test even. External locus are factors outside of ourselves, such as blaming as a teacher for not liking you when you receive a bad grade. Maybe you say, "Oh, I didn't pass this test or this assignment because my teacher just doesn't like me." Stability refers to when we believe that events are results of factors that probably won't change in the future. For example, someone may think that they'll never be in the NFL because they just aren't big enough, they aren't tall enough. Unstable factors are things that can change from one time to the next. You may think that you won a competition just due to sheer luck. When thinking about control, we should ask if a factor is even in our control. Controllable factors are things we can influence or change. For example, if you think that you failed a class because you didn't try your best on the final, that would be a controllable factor. An uncontrollable factor would be something you have absolutely no influence on. Like if you need to take an exam between the hours of 1 to 3 on a Tuesday, but you can't because a storm knocked out your power. You can't control a storm, so that would be an uncontrollable factor. So in the classroom, teachers can use attribution theory to help students understand their successes and failures. Students should talk through their successes and failures. Teachers can use the theory to help students understand that their effort is usually the main predictor of achievement. Attribution theory provides a great way to conference with your students. In your conference time, help students understand why they failed an assignment or was successful using the parts of the attribution theory. Next up is about Gagne's theory of instruction. Gagne has 9 learning events, but we're going to be focusing on 4. He believed that the learning events should follow these steps: gaining attention of your learners, informing learners of the objectives, stimulating recall of prior learning, present the content, provide learning guidance, elicit performance, provide feedback, assess performance, enhance retention, and transfer to the job or to your long-term memory. First, we're going to focus on gaining attention. Gaining attention is simply as it seems. You need to provide a new stimulus to gain the attention of your students. It may be considered hooking your students in your lesson plans. This may be repeated throughout the lessons as students seem to be off task, so it doesn't just have to be at the beginning of your lesson. Some ways you can use it. You can use class callbacks. For example, one popular one is when the teacher says class, class, and the students say yes, yes. This would continue until you have the attention of all students in the class. It's important to gain the attention of all students before starting the lesson. You don't want to leave one student not being hooked. One way I gain attention is by using a countdown. Students know when I begin to count down from 5 or 10 that they are to stop what they're doing and put their eyes on me. Next is informing the learner of the objective. Letting students know the objectives or goals of the lesson or unit. Students should understand what they need to be able to accomplish at the end of a lesson. So in the classroom, some teachers can use I can statements to inform students of their goals. For example, if a teacher is teaching a lesson on animal adaptations in the swamp region, one I can statement would be, I can explain one adaptation of an animal in the swamp region. I prefer to use a visible learning statement. So these are, today I am, so I can, I know I've got it when. For example, that same lesson, my visible learning statement would be, today I'm learning about animal adaptations, so I can understand the importance of adaptations that animals in Georgia have. I know I've got it when I can describe an animal adaptation of an animal in the swamp region. Next would be to the elicit performance. After presenting the stimulus or teaching a lesson, you'll need to give students the opportunity to show what they've learned without fear of penalty. You don't want your students to think that they're going to fail an assignment just because they're trying. Teachers can provide feedback during this time, but it should really be focused on student practice. So in the classroom, this might be considered their independent work time, like your independent practice portion of the lesson. In my classroom, I give students a math problem and have them solve the problem while I walk around and observe. I'm not grading this. This is just for practice. I might provide feedback if a student asks a question, but I really want to see what students can do during this time. Some teachers may refer to this as the you try or you do portion of the lesson. After eliciting performance, you would provide feedback. Feedback should be informative to the students. It should inform students of their progress to the learning objectives or the goals. So how can you use it? You can provide feedback informally and formally. After providing students with the opportunity to elicit performance, you as the teacher can provide quick on-the-spot feedback as you're walking around the room. For example, you may provide feedback on an addition math problem by asking students to try the problem again and don't forget to regroup this time. One way you can formally provide feedback is by meeting with your students through conferencing. After math tests, I meet with my students and provide feedback by helping them understand which math problems they missed and why they missed that problem. We then discuss if they feel like they've met their learning goals for that lesson or unit. Next, we're going to talk about social cognitive theory and focusing on self-efficacy and modeling. Self-efficacy is a student's belief that they can successfully complete a task. It's when a student asks themselves, how well can I complete that task? It can affect activity choices, goals, and effort. There are two different types of self-efficacy. Self-efficacy for learning, which is when a student thinks they have the ability to learn something, and self-efficacy for performance, which is when a student believes that they can already do something. So in the classroom, students need to believe in themselves in order to have high self-efficacy in the classroom. As a teacher, your job is to encourage students to choose obtainable goals. When students believe that they can accomplish their goals, they'll put forth a higher level of effort. One way you can help students choose attainable goals is to conference with your students. For example, a student struggling with single-digit addition should not have a goal in reference to three-digit addition, even if that's what you're doing in your classroom. Another way to promote self-efficacy in the classroom is to provide students with choice. Students can choose the activity that they believe they will be the most successful in. For example, you can use choice boards after teaching rocks and minerals to allow students to show mastery. Maybe they want to create a song about rocks and minerals. Maybe they want to create a PowerPoint about rocks and minerals. They can have many different choices. Next is modeling. Modeling is when a model demonstrates a behavior they want the learner to mimic. Teachers use modeling a lot in the classroom. Students are constantly watching what you're doing and modeling those behaviors. Modeling influences the frequency of previously learned behaviors. Students are more likely to show a behavior if they see others being reinforced for that behavior. Students may also show a similar behavior rather than an identical behavior. There are 3 different types of modeling that you may see in the classroom: live modeling, symbolic modeling, and verbal instructions. Live modeling is when a person is demonstrating a particular behavior live. A symbolic model is one in a book, video game, movie, or another similar medium modeling a behavior, so they are not live right in front of the student. Verbal instruction is when someone describes how to behave. These could be oral or written. So in the classroom, one way I've seen modeling is through social skills or academic skills. To teach social skills, you may model a role play situation about playground behavior or bullying and have the students react to the model. You could also show a video of people using the desired social skills. I use the modeling a lot in my math classroom. I use live modeling to show a student how to complete a math problem. This is me working on a math problem, but also discussing how I'm solving the problem. I've seen live modeling being used in kindergarten classrooms to show students how to pronounce a word or their letter sounds. The teachers want to show the student their mouth on how to pronounce that sound. Lastly, you could model desired behaviors in the classroom. You may also choose students that are modeling those behaviors to reward in hopes that their behavior will influence the students around them. Those are some quick ways to use learning theories in your classroom this year.